Hi there. Welcome to the Isogo TV podcast from isogostrong.com. I'm your host, Becky Hammond, and you and I gather here on this podcast to fixate on strength in our families and on our teams. Because when we can start from assuming strength of each other, we can make our relationships easier. This is episode 128, and today is our third and last in this mini-series about well-being using your strengths. Well-being is a particularly challenging state to pursue right now. The mental stress alone is enough to throw it off. Yet, those who are feeling a great sense of well-being are often doing it in the only way that's good for them, through the filter of their strengths. In this episode, I got to be interviewed again by Kat Rippey of Energized Leadership. This time, all about a topic that is near and dear to my heart. You can hear it in my voice. I might have become a bit animated about it all. It's the rhythm of well-being between your personal and professional selves. Even if we thought we could separate those spaces before, now they are much too crunched together that we have to face it. Our professional and personal selves and the well-being of that dynamic plays a huge part in our overall well-being. So we get to dive further into the third space that Murray and I explored in episode 125. And the brilliant Kat even came up with this amazing pie chart that we can use to truly take action on this part of our well-being. So let's dive into this last episode on well-being and strengths.
Hello, Kat. Thank you.
So happy to be back on. I really enjoyed our last conversation. And I thought we covered some really great tidbits that are very practical for today's leaders and workplaces. And I think that we would be remiss without having an additional conversation about the workplace actually being in the home place.
Yeah, they're a little mixed up right now, right?
Yeah, so I thought we could come back and just have a conversation about how strengths can play a role in our home and in our personal life, which right now is pretty, I mean, it's always intersected, right? But
Right.
more than ever, it is undeniably intersected pretty much all of the time. So I'd like to hear about what you have experienced. I mean, I think our own personal stories probably play a pretty big role. And then what you've seen too with others that you've been working with in their work lives and how that's kind of come into play in their home life and how they've leveraged strengths there, or where you've seen it, just anything you have that can help us think about it a little bit differently and maybe more effectively at this crazy time. And I do want to shout out right now, just from a where we are in the arc of COVID, we're heading into the school season, which we now have clarity that school will be mostly happening for most people in the home environment, at least for a period of time. So I think it's just really relevant at this moment, but it's also, we don't really know how that's looking for people quite yet. So we're a little ahead of that curve at the moment.
Yeah, totally. And, I think during this entire evolution of everything that has happened and the crisis and uncertainty that has followed and continues to exist, I think a lot of leaders are saying, I'm spending more time with my family than I ever have in my entire life, right? Which is true of people who are suddenly working from home who didn't before. But there are also leaders out there, people who I have the privilege of having really coaching relationships with, who are also saying, I'm working from home, but I'm seeing my family less than I ever have before. And so we're kind of, as we talk about how we don't live siloed lives, like we never have, as you said, we never have lived siloed lives, like a professional life and a personal life. Like we are not can't be siloed people. We're like interconnected beings. We're one person that has these different roles that we need to play. But now more than ever, they're kind of colliding together. And that has looked different for different people. Some people are like, please get me back to work. I this is not what I envisioned my life to be, was, being around my family all the time. And then there's, some people who are saying, I work from home, but this uncertainty has provided so much extra work that I actually see them less. And so, and then there are the situations where people, they don't have people at home. I have a stepbrother who, he lives alone in Los Angeles. Like, how difficult is that? Because you're in a place where there's a lot of restrictions, or there has been, and you don't have a natural community that you can be a part of. And so now there's a lot of people complaining about how many kids they have running in the background and their cat jumping. It's like some people are feeling the opposite of, like, I've never felt lonelier in my life. I wish I had annoying kids to, like, come and distract me, because at least then I wouldn't be feeling so lonely. And so, when we talk about professional and personal, we are talking about lots of different types of scenarios. And so, I speak from a family where we have 5 kids. They're 9 and under. My husband had just started a new job. It was the first time it's ever been started remotely. And so we do have that situation where we are all together all the time. We're wearing multiple hats in a day, in a minute, like, we're wearing multiple hats in a minute. And so just kind of putting it out there, that's my perspective. That's the perspective that I come from, is I'm seeing more of everybody, not less, but that's not the only professional, personal overlap that's being experienced out there by leaders and by workplaces and by team members.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you for kind of honoring everybody in that scenario, because I do think this is all really related to well-being, and everyone is experiencing well-being stressors in no matter what your situation is, right?
Yeah.
So nobody's going through this as business as usual, where there's no changes, because even if you're in an area that's not affected as much, if you're in a work environment where your work has remained steady or increased, you're still getting your environment being different. Maybe your grocery store has shifted things.
Totally.
Maybe you're just not seeing people as much. You can't travel. Travel is definitely a challenge. So there's so many changes that everybody's experiencing. And I think that's where we need to, I think, first of all, recognize what's being asked of us in this moment as individuals. We're going through a lot. There's a lot of loss. And then there's also a lot of just change, which always takes so much effort. And, everybody has their own kind of, with any given change, you have your own I don't want to say adaptability, but you adapt differently to different. Some of them you're like, woohoo, let's go. And some of them you're like, oh, I don't want to do that. I don't want to, So we're all being stressed and challenged in different ways. And that's definitely been shown through statistics in many different studies, where stress is up significantly, worry, loneliness, a lot of
suicide and abuse and domestic violence, and just things that I think when we first saw this, people are like, oh, I wonder what's going to happen, and now we're kind of seeing some of those, the impacts of that, that aren't pointing towards a better sense of well-being. I think some people have really taken the positive side of things and have said, okay, well, I'm going to, I loved these things about being stuck with my family for, 2 months. So I'm going to try to keep this one thing and make that a positive. But because we're now into, month 5, month 6, I think it's those things are starting to take a toll, and we are not well. We are not as well as we have been or want to be. That's for sure.
Absolutely. I will share a personal story, because I think that this is important. My son, who is 10, I found a note folded up in his, he'd missed the garbage can back in May, June. So kind of as we were starting to think things were going to be reopening again.
Right.
The note said, how can I make my life better? And then he had kind of things, and then they were scratched off. And then ultimately it kind of ended in, there's nothing I can do.
Oh.
And I saw the note, and it was a big moment for me, because the reason I want to talk about this is because we need to be really knowledgeable about ourselves and where we stand, but we also need to be tuned in to those around us, whether it's people that we work with or people that we live with, right? Or people who are alone, and tapping into, if you know somebody who's alone, who's keeping track of them, who's tapping into where they are, right? Not everybody's going to leave a crumpled up note by the garbage can, but that is
I know.
a huge moment to recognize this is not working. It's not working for everybody, and it takes a lot of mental effort to make an effort to figure out how to get through it in a positive way, right?
Yeah.
To make it work for you as well as it can.
Yeah. Yeah. And to realize that that feeling a little bit of hopelessness, which feels like a very personal feeling, impacts every area of our life.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not, well, at home, I feel a little bit overwhelmed or stressed, but I'm just going to unplug from that and I'm going to go to work. There is no that anymore. It's like, I'm going to unplug from that and I'm going to turn around and go to work, right? Like, that's a very different paradigm shifting thing. Just today, I was actually kind of thinking through how strengths impact well-being. And I was just kind of doing my intellection number 9 thing, where I just like use my hair drying space to have ideas. And I was thinking, man, I don't know, like this, how my personal life and my professional life interact. And I mean, I guess they kind of always have, I don't know, it's just like having all these different thoughts. And while I was getting ready and thinking, my mother-in-law came in with our 9-month-old, and who was going down for a nap, and our 9-month-old, she saw me, she started crying. And then, so my mother-in-law took her out, she's putting her down. Then our 9-year-old came in and said, well, we're supposed to be resting, but my 5-year-old brother is, he's on my bed and I don't know, I can't rest. And, and like just telling me the whole scenario and asking for some input and some guidance. And I just kind of stopped and smiled, because I was like, oh, this is it. Right? Like, this is the interplay between my like professional internal world, getting ready for something, and like navigating everything that's happening in front of me. The rhythm has shifted. No matter if you, what your scenario is and what your personal situation is, our personal lives and professional lives are like mushed, like woven together, and sometimes the tapestry doesn't look so pretty on the other side.
That's not great.
No.
Yeah, that's a good set. I think, I just want to say I've experienced that plenty. The lack between home and work, especially when there are children involved. But if you don't have children involved, there's still a mix of, you're working next to your bed, or you're working at the dining room table, right? Do you have the space that you need to be able to kind of separate both of those lives from each other? And also, when you aren't able to go out as much as you used to, or in the same ways, a lot of times you can end up going more to work than you should be. You know what I mean? Where you're that becomes your thing, because that's the only thing there is to do. Or on the flip side, you can have a lot of other things you have to be taken care of right now, like finances. And I happen to have a couple of aging parents, which it's another thing, right? And so you can be solving other problems that are not part of work and taking you away from work when you should be working. So kind of that flexible scheduling that people have been asking for so long, right?
For a long time now, yes.
Real for everyone, where we need to work when we can work, we need to do the other things when we need to do the other things. And how do we show up in our best way, no matter where it is we're showing up, especially when it's in different environments all the time, I'm curious if you've seen strengths, your own or others, kind of playing a role there in helping you to kind of show up in the way that you need to be showing up.
Yeah. Let me, I'm going to start with, if you have good news, bad news, I'm going to start with bad news and then let's move to good news. There's a leader who one of my managers was working for, and he had strengths that were, I would call them high thinking strengths and high executing strengths. So somebody who, um, really thrived by getting things done, who also was very much a people pleaser. And so just really, went into the role realizing that he was going to do whatever the higher ups, asked of him because it was important to him. And he ended up, I mean, when you talk about like working numbers of hours in a day, I mean, there were more numbers of hours in a day that he was working than he was with his family or sleeping, and so his relationship with his wife of, I think they had been married over 20 years, that were, high school sweethearts, started crumbling. He had made promises to his kids about what he could do with them, and wasn't able to follow through on those things because he would end up having something that he had to do for work. And then the kicker, so now when you talk about different areas of well-being, like his family well-being was down, um, down the tubes. And then he showed up one day kind of like hunched over like this, like, like got up to work and couldn't like stand up all the way. And it turned out that his back, he had thrown his back out. There was like a slip disc or something, technically speaking. But from an outside perspective, now this is as a coach from the person that I was coaching, and this is his boss, I'm seeing this overdrive of these strengths that are bringing him to a place where he's not only destroying the personal side of his life, but he's now also destroying his body. And as a result, it made it so he couldn't show up as well. He couldn't do as well as a leader, certainly as a leader, but even in his role and his everyday duties as well. And so, I say that's the bad news side of like, we can use our strengths can get in our way sometimes. Well, this comes so naturally to me. I'm stressed. I'm overwhelmed. I'm just going to do more of what comes naturally to me. Well, that might pause, stop, not be the best thing for your family or for your role as a leader, especially when those things are so intertwined. So intertwined right now.
I'm guilty of that one. And I'm just going to own that right now because I've been feeling it. It wasn't really until you said it. It was strengths being overused. It almost becomes an addiction. It's the thing right now. It's the thing that makes you feel good. And there's not a whole lot out there that's making us feel good, right?
That is so true. Yes.
I will say, as somebody who runs a business, and any other business owner can totally get this, what do? You dive into your business. How are we going to make this work? How are we going to event? What are the opportunities? I mean, how many opportunities can you take advantage of right now? But all of those opportunities require some level of reinvention.
Right.
It's a lot of extra work to reinvent yourself, right? So all of those can really just become a narrow tunnel where you're just going that way and everybody else doesn't get anything, right?
Yeah, I mean, it also, like they take those opportunities, take a reinvention. Those opportunities also, as you're saying, that comes to my mind, and they have opportunity cost. They are there are things that you are spending while you're trying to build. If you're building in a tunnel, right? Like if I invest in this, then I can't invest in, let's say, the plan for my kid's school, or I can't, help my son answer those questions for himself, right? Like if you're so busy that you just threw the trash away, then you would never know that he was asking those questions. But now you have this little crumpled up piece of paper gem that you can, if you want to, and if you set some time aside for that, go back and say, hey, let's talk about like what feels hopeful right now. But you're not going to be able to do that without when you have that tunnel vision. Yeah, you're
Yep.
totally right.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's a tricky one, because I think when you're in the middle of a crisis, you're,
Hmm.
you're, I don't know, you're in a whole different kind of void of problem solving or coping, or, whatever it is you're going through personally, that it becomes kind of a slippery slope. For me, that with that example with my son, they had been doing a lot of online school at the time, and I actually was spending a lot of time with them in the school, but it was school, and then it
Right.
was me and my work, my husband and his work, and their alone time or their fun time was virtual. So whether it was
Right.
games or hanging out with somebody virtually, it just was not fulfilling for them. You know what I mean? We even going out for walks and stuff, it's not the same for kids. Well, it's not the same for any of us, really,
Right.
with social interaction. So I think it's a slippery slope. I think you have to watch yourself as you go through that tunnel, and I think that's why this strengths conversation is so important, because recognizing where you're your own enemy, recognizing where you can be your best hero,
Mm.
is really critical for being able to continue to pave this path as we go through a lot of real shifts, and some workplaces won't come back the same way for a lot of reasons. Even the ones that are
Right.
biggest companies in our country have put coming back into the office off for well over another year. You know what I mean? So,
Right.
and then there are those who come back, and it's like whoever wants to come can come, and who doesn't. That means that workplace is not the same for anyone,
That's
right?
right.
So things have changed kind of in a way that's not. It's never going to be quite like it. I shouldn't say never, but it's for a long time. It's not going to be like it
Yes.
was.
Yes.
So
I
you
mean, I
have,
think like your futuristic strength can say never, right? Like no matter what, there's something that's going to be different, feel different, like it's just,
yeah,
there are going to be differences. If there is an organization that tries to go back exactly how it was, I guarantee they will fail. I was working with a leader whose organization was a governmental organization. They try to do exactly that. They're like, okay, we're going back, and everyone's going back, and there were no requirements like one way or the other about masks. And some people felt uncertain and fearful, and some people, felt fine and like relieved to be away from their families. And some people were like, oh my gosh, I had this experience of like being with my family and I loved it. And now like, why do I see like my colleagues in like, working for a different organization are like still working from home and being with their kids and, able to handle this? And why don't you recognize that I was still killing it, even though I was with my kids and doing all, I was hitting our goals more than I ever have. And, that imploded on them. The organization, as soon as, one person at the company got COVID and they didn't tell everybody, and all of a sudden it was like this huge, this huge thing, and then everyone went home again. But instead of feeling happy and excited about it, like they maybe were, they were like bitter and frustrated and feeling totally untrusted as an organization, and like their organization was untrustworthy. So, if people do try to go back exactly how it was, it's not even going to work.
that's a great point. And I think what we all should be doing right now is really focusing on recognizing and
Hmm.
and admitting. I shouldn't even say admitting. It's allowing room for that. The fact that people have changed.
Yeah.
Everyone has had some kind of change. And if you're the one who wants to go back to normal, I honor that, because that's where you are, right?
Right.
But there's probably 50% of the people who aren't there at all. And then
Right.
there's a portion of them who changed significantly in a whole different way. And so no matter what, we all just have to make room for what those changes might be and be prepared for those kinds of shifts happening for quite a while, and
Yeah.
working through it, because it's a whole nother,
Yeah.
kind of like another phase that we're going to have to work through, right?
Totally. And I think the same is true of our families, as we're talking about our professional and personal lives kind of like
Mhm.
um, combining here, like recognizing that everyone in our family might not be experiencing it in the same way or processing it in the same way or be as excited or not excited to go back to the way things used to be in the same way. And realizing that it's a process for everybody, and that if we could somehow figure out how to take this crisis and a crisis that we're dealing with together as a family or as an organization or as friends, and be better or grow because of it, which is basically the opposite of just going back to how it used to be, then
Right.
we're going to come out on the other side stronger and better. But it does take that permission of allowing everybody to be in the space that they're at that given moment.
Right. Yeah, and recognizing too that even though a year, if you just bite it off as 1 year. A year seems like a really long time, but in
Right.
the scheme of things, it's really not, right?
Right.
So we're going through an evolution. It's kind of like, it's funny. We did take a little journey to Colorado, and I have family, and we needed to be with some family, and so there's a lot of dinosaur stuff in Colorado that doesn't exist, I guess, where I live, right? About millions of years ago, and how these ice ages happened over so much time, right? That you were going through it, you didn't know you were going through it, right? Like, oh, your friend the lizard, he didn't make it, but you even realized the lizards weren't alive anymore, Actually,
Right.
lizards did make it, but
That's right. And as we've found out, dinosaurs are actually more like birds. I mean, it's very confusing. When I went to the Natural History Museum, I was like, wait, what? Dinosaurs have feathers now? I am very confused, and I'm not going to be able to teach my kids about dinosaurs. So sorry about that.
it's crazy. But that stuff happens over so much time, and
Yeah.
I feel like having like an ice age right now, like we're all
Yeah.
gonna do this end of it. That's extreme, but it's what it feels like, right? That there's at least a revolution, right? We go through these industrial revolution, informational revolution. We go through all these periods of time over 10, 15, 20 years.
That's right.
We're kind of going through it all at one time in 1 year. And everyone's along for that ride in some way. And our kids are part of it too. So I think, how we show up for those of us who are in the workplace, you have to show up for yourself. How do you get what you need?
Right.
You have to show up for your workplace. What do they need?
Right.
No matter what your role is.
Yep.
Those who are in a leadership role have an extra level, but really everybody has a responsibility to be showing up there and honoring what's going on there. And then you have these kids, when you do have a family, how are you helping them to get through it? What are we doing to talk with them through it? How are we helping them to see how they're showing up and I guess the beauty is, since they're in the home environment, if we have conscious language that we can use, or a really intentional purpose on having conversations with them that we don't get to have when they're in the school environment.
That's right.
About how they think, about how they get their needs filled, about how they figure out kind of this virtual space in a way that works for them. Some are thriving, and then others are just dying, right?
Right. Melting away, shriveling up. Right.
So how do we help give them the language? So, I mean, I think with strengths, I'd love to know, what are some overarching kind of strengths concepts that can be helpful as we manage these kind of different roles or different experiences that are in one environment, right? Mastering parenthood is usually that's one thing. We do that.
That's the separate thing. Right. And then being a good leader, that's another thing. And then, meeting my goals, that's another thing, right? Like all these different things that kind of have traditionally fallen in different spaces, even though we know we're one person, but you could like separate them out. A colleague of mine, Murray Guest, has this concept that he's been talking about recently called the third space. And what that is getting at is that you have, let's say, two primary spaces. You have your workspace, space one, and then you have your home space, space two. And in the past, you traditionally, maybe you commuted to that first space. You were there, committed to that first space, and then you leave, and you're now then in your home space. And we tried it. It didn't always work. Let's not like rose-colored glasses, like the back. Like we often things were answering calls, and things were spilling over, or you were staying late, or whatever it was. But typically it was like this home space or workspace and home space. And then there's also this third space, that place that you went to rejuvenate, reconnect, re-energize. And maybe, on last episode, we talked about like mountain biking, right? Like maybe that's your thing, or it's reading, maybe that's your thing, but it was something that's not at your workspace and it's not your family space, but it's in a different place, a different space. And I think what's happened over this last, 5 or 6 months is that those spaces have slowly like merged together. And the third space has really gotten crunched out because all of our extra time is kind of taken maybe in balancing the two, or figuring out like mental energy, figuring out like, well, how am I going to keep doing, how are my kids going to be at home, and I'm going to continue on with my professional life. And so the third space is kind of getting neglected. And so from a strengths perspective, I just back that up 1 second to say the same is true of our kids, right? Like they used to have, for the most part, we homeschooled this last year. So I guess we were like a little ahead of the curve. Like we were kind of all like mushed together anyway. But like for the most part, like kids, their school space is one space and their home space is another space. And never the two shall meet for kids, especially in junior high and high school, right? Like that's like devastating when those two things kind of come together. Well, now like there is no choice. They are together. And so their third space, whether, that was just spending time with their friends, or, maybe it's video games, maybe it was their extracurricular activities that have been canceled, their music or their sports. And now that third space has also been restricted and constricted. So the way our strengths comes into that third space, whether it's kids at home, whether it's our own personal and professional lives, is that figuring out, and we kind of talked about this a little bit during our Strengths and Wellbeing podcast, figuring out, what is it that makes you, what was that third space for you? What did you do that made you be filled up besides what was coming from work and what was coming from home? And how can you get more of that? And based on who you are through your strengths, it's going to look different. If you're someone who loves to think, you're going to, actually, Kat, you've shared before, like sometimes doing something is like sitting on the couch and thinking about stuff, right? Like you're going to be the most productive when you're doing that. Well, because your kids are home and your husband's working from home and you're working from home and you're thinking about how to reevaluate, your business and how to, invent yourself, like that couch third space ends up getting crunched out. And so as an individual, how can you like look into those energy pockets, look into your strengths and say, where's my third space and how do I get that back?
Love that. That's really useful. And I think it's funny, I've never thought of life that way, but it's so true. And one of the things I did that was actually really useful with the family, pretty early on during the stay-at-home orders, was I put a chart up on the wall. And I assigned everybody a meal. There's 4 of us, so this was kind of easy. Everybody had 1 meal per day, and then the other person had dish duty.
Okay.
And then we would decide together what kind of meals you did, and they were appropriate to your age or ability
stage
level.
Yes.
Right? and then there was a rule that if you didn't like what was cooked, you could go get, whatever your default of choice was, which for some people is a hot dog and other people is a pizza, who knows, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Or sandwich, whatever it was. So you could help yourself to your own option, but one person was in charge of it. And I could not believe, because I went from frustrated right away. It was like, oh my God, I can't do all the, and I've heard this from so many people, the dishes, oh my God.
Yes.
The meal, we never have ever had lunch at home together. You know what I mean?
Right, totally.
So, I liked it. It was like, hey, this can't go on like this. We're not getting anything done. So that helped. And I couldn't believe how everybody felt, I guess, like clarity and control. productive. Like they felt like they were contributing value to the family. My 10-year-old, who would never touch, he's a boy, so he really was not into the cooking thing. He didn't want to do it. But his first meal, which was a super simple, packaged meal from Trader Joe's, right?
Right.
He was like, was it good? Was it good? Did I do good? He was so proud.
How cool is that?
So the whole story there is the chart and being able to really assign and think through the things that we need to do as a family, as opposed to one person taking all of that responsibility. What I was starting to see was a pie chart for this third space, workspace, home
space. Oh, home
and
space, yeah.
Put a pie chart on a wall and really have a conversation. Sorry, I'm a visual, so I always have.
Let's put a pie
Paper in my house. I have artwork. We have vision boards and plan boards. But have that pie chart where we can be intentional and have a conversation every week, and also kind of be starting to think that way, that everybody can then start to take their own responsibility for, hey, my third space is getting neglected. I need to take care of it, and calling attention to it. Because it's amazing how much people, and you know what, I say this about kids, but it is the same thing in the workplace. If you're working with other people and you just bring something out, and I always say, you put it on the board. It's not about me. This is about a thing called third space.
Yes,
you know what I mean?
Right.
Like
totally.
As its own thing, and everybody gets to contribute in their own way. People respond in a way that is really helpful for the collective, right? Where everybody's on the same page, everybody's speaking the same language, everybody's been able to get what they need, they've been able to say what they need, and now we can all move forward together, as opposed to I'm fighting for that and nobody knows I'm fighting for it, and I'm frustrated and angry or depleted, or I just disappear because I need to get away.
Right. I'm find me like slumped down on the couch underneath the blanket, so hoping that nobody sees me. Right. Yeah. No, I love that. And that whole like putting it out there, like we're talking about this thing, it like makes it not personal. There's less room for defensiveness. It's not like, you don't put up these barriers. I mean, the same thing can be true said of, understanding yourself through a language like StrengthsFinder, something that's like external to you, to say like, okay, we're talking about these things out here. We're not talking about you, even though of course we are talking about ourselves. When we're talking about the pie chart with the third space, that's my third space, right? We are talking about ourselves, but there's something about it that then like clarifies terms and makes it so that it doesn't feel as personally attacking on the people who are kind of bristling a little bit.
Right. And I love, if you go back to our last conversation, where we really talked about needs, and the question that you put out there about when was the last time you felt great, or what are the things that you are doing when you're feeling fulfilled,
in the flow.
You could almost ask that question about every one of those spaces, because if we leverage our strengths more frequently, we feel better, we're more productive, we have more energy, right? So if you took each one of those spaces and really had kind of that strengths conversation, how am I making sure that it's an equal third? And I'm covering all three. How do I make sure that I'm operating in my strength zone in a positive way the majority of the time in each one of those? It's a great way to kind of keep yourself calibrated and also in that positive space, as opposed to just kind of ending up somewhere where you don't intend to be, right?
Right, totally. And where people who know you well, can feel free to comment without it feeling super personal, where we can use the strengths language so that it doesn't feel like an attack, but rather it feels like, no, we've given ourselves permission to talk through this together in this way. And so now I can be more receptive to, my husband saying, wow, your achiever, maybe how do you think your achiever's doing at work? When he like sees my pie chart and it's like, this much is at work and the rest is, a little bit at home, and, probably no third space. So we can have conversations and dialogues like that as well. Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's so hard to, well, it's just unnatural to have conversations about our needs. And when
Yeah.
we have a conversation, it's usually seen as very selfish, or it feels selfish, right? I'm not getting enough, yada, yada. You know, I don't have enough time for sitting on the couch and thinking, well, why do you think you have time for that? There's dishes to be done and there's
Right.
work to be done. And but I think if we can tune in to what those needs are for us individually, in order to be our best, in order to feel positive and have happiness, essentially,
Yeah.
at the end of the day, right?
Right.
If we recognize that everyone has different ones, then they're not so personal. It's not so, I don't know, I want to say like tit for tat, right? Like, well, if you get time on the couch, then what do I get? You know,
Yes, totally.
what is your thing? What do you need? I need to not judge that too. If it's time in your workshop, or time workshop in the garage kind of thing, you know, or
Right.
time for a walk, or time at the gym, you know, a lot of,
Right.
well, that's not really a thing right now, but some kind of physical activity. For a
Right.
lot of people, my husband, don't tell him I'm telling you this, but he's kind of like a 2-hour guy. And I'm like, can't you just do 20 minutes? Like, it's 2 hours or I'm
Or
not doing
nothing.
any physical activity.
Okay.
You know? And I'm
There
like,
you go.
but 20 minutes gets you somewhere, little by little, I'll, you know, but you know what? That's your thing. Go do
Yeah.
your thing. It's going to
Yeah.
be better.
Get your third space. Let's show me that pie chart and we'll all be on the same page.
Well, that was great. Any other tidbits or tips that you've seen work well for yourself or others as you're managing the?
You know, I think I think the only thing that comes to my mind is that this situation that we're in right now, where our lives are, all of our spaces are kind of collided. I think it's giving us an opportunity to really recognize if we are the same person at home as we are at work. I know I'm sensitive to that when I'm, I do a lot of social media promotion and things like that. And I can feel like I'm a different person. And as my kids watch me do these things, I'm conscientious that I show up for them like I show up for my clients or for my potential customers. Um, I don't want to be giving them my leftovers when I'm like all positive and optimistic and stuff for my community at work. And so I think that this collision is it's giving me that, and I hope it's giving other people that opportunity to reflect on that. Like, who am I? Who am I? I mean, I'm really, okay, that's like a question for like 12 more podcasts, right? But like, who am I at work and who am I at home? And are those things consistent? I had a professor in business school who said that she wanted her kids and her colleagues to say the exact same things about her. And that always just kind of resonated with me, because I think I had a inclination to turn it on and turn it off. And what would it look like if I didn't do that? Maybe it would take a lot more energy, but maybe it just would mean I need to be more creative about how I approach my family, or what I'm thinking about when I'm with my family, so that I can show up in as good of a state of mind with them as I am with everybody else that I experience in my work world.
There's another one. You're killing me today. I'm guilty of that.
Oh, this is what coaches do, you know.
Can't help it. Yeah, I think when at the very beginning I meant to say this and I forgot, and this is coming up again. Your kids, when you are, well, whoever's in your home environment is seeing
Right.
you
That's
at
true.
work, and they don't necessarily always see you at work. And the other thing is, I was having another conversation with someone else about the virtual reality of today, which is always an issue. It's a big conversation to have, even regardless of COVID. But
Yeah.
clearly, it's so much more significant in the workplace, I'm sorry, in the home being the workplace,
Yes.
and then everybody working online and schooling online. And so one of the things I recognized early on in my time working from home, not even just for COVID, but before COVID, when I would work at home, the kids are actually anybody, when you're on a device or it's mainly like a phone device, or even a computer, but when you're on it, you're obviously not with them, but you're also
Right.
kind of putting them off, right? So if you've ever been to lunch with somebody and they answer the phone while they're at the table, they look at their phone while they're at the table,
Yeah.
it's almost like a full rejection, right?
Yeah.
It's not just they're checking their phone. It's like, that's a whole conversation I am not in. I am excluded from that conversation. And so why should you be having that conversation right now, right?
Mm-hmm.
You're waiting for your wife to go into labor. That's a different story. You make room for that,
Right.
you know.
Exactly.
But,
But you've said it ahead of time, and there's a common understanding. And yeah.
but your kids are seeing that. And so when you're on
Mm.
your device, you're telling your kids that you're not with them. And I think that line is so hard when we're working in the home environment,
Yeah.
because I'm not trying to reject you. I'm not choosing my phone or social media over you right now. I'm literally doing my work, but because I'm doing it in front of you,
Right.
I'm at the same time rejecting you. They don't have that
Right.
same kind of boundary clarity that we do with our significant others or other adults in the workplace. I mean, in the
Right.
home workplace.
Home workplace.
And so, yeah, whatever we're calling it now.
Yeah, exactly.
So I think it's important to kind of have those boundaries and to recognize them, but to have conversations about them and how can we do those things in a way where we can show up more fluidly between the environments in a positive way. Does it mean you
Right.
take a break? Does it mean you shut a door? Right? Does
Right.
it mean you do
Yeah.
some things outside? Or even just putting up a piece of paper. I actually noticed a big difference. We don't normally do papers unless we're like recording something, right? But my
Right.
husband and I both will put up, well, in the past we would put up a note. Well, actually in the past the kids weren't even home. But for each other, sometimes we would put up a note.
Mm-hmm.
If you're like on an important call and you don't want to be
Right.
interrupted.
Right.
It says such a different thing than not having a note up and then they're trying to get in and you're like, shut, you stop,
Yeah.
which is
Totally.
direct impact than, hey, I'm busy right now and it's not about you, it's about work.
Right.
Not saying any messages to you, trying to get my work done here.
Yeah. I love that. Like space, like maybe it's a door, or maybe you don't have a lot of doors in your house and it just needs to be a sign, that's like mama's at work, or like that's the sign, so that it's not personal, because when you leave for work they're not taking it personally. Like if you go work with a client at their, like in your previous life where you are actually going out and working with people, like they're not like, oh, my mom's ignoring me. No, they're like, my mom's at work. Well, how can we do that a little bit more fluidly? I think that's a worthy conversation to have.
It is definitely, definitely. And I think at the crux of what you were saying is how do you also manage yourself so that you can show up best in each one of those environments? And I think one of the things is when you are managing a lot at the same time and playing different roles at the same time, you're also potentially answering a work message while you're preparing lunch because you have to.
Right.
And so you're on all the time. It's kind of, we always had some of that going on. Answer messages in the middle of the night or whatever it was for different people. But at this point, you're doing that more than ever, and you probably kind of need to, because you're taking more time to do your own personal stuff in the middle of the day than you probably were before. And so then you are going to be able to check in at 7 or 8 o'clock at night or whenever that time is for you, where you can get stuff done. Or good for you, you took an hour to go for that walk you needed at 2 or whatever, you made that room in yourself, but you have to get your work done. When is that getting done? So I think when you blur your boundaries too, in terms of when you're working, that can equally, it just makes everything very confusing for everybody. Who are you right now at this moment? What are you doing?
What can I expect of you right now? Yeah.
Yeah. Why did it suddenly change?
Yeah.
2 minutes ago, it was fine,
Exactly. Totally. Yep. I'm guilty of that for sure.
Yeah. So in terms of, I guess, boundaries, I would say the same thing. Then you had mentioned on the other call about the importance of scheduling time. Any tidbits on scheduling, scheduling boundaries, but
Scheduling
setting
boundaries.
setting boundaries, whether they're scheduled or not, in terms of the kind of home environment, but also in the workplace, because at work we're working,
Both.
but we're working at home. And is
Right.
anybody even aware of what boundaries we're trying to set?
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think, in the summary of these things that we're kind of pulling together on as we chat about, professional and personal intermingling, investing in that third space. I mean, this pie chart concept and like having a visual to me is like, boom, that's your takeaway. Like, make a pie chart, talk to your work about it. Your teams, like, how valuable would that be if as a leader, you brought that type of concept visually to your team and said like, hey, I want you to invest in all three of these spaces. Yes, I'm in this one piece of this pie as your leader, but you have these other pieces that are just as important, if not more, to your overall well-being. And so I think, when you talk about creating boundaries, having that type of a conversation will start to create boundaries, because you are creating a dialogue that people are feeling willing and trusting you as a leader, or you as a parent, or you as a partner or a friend to be able to have that type of a conversation with. So I'm like, pie chart, bam, that's our takeaway. Our 3 spaces pie chart.
Love it. And then, similar to our last call, conversations, right? Having the actual intentional conversation, both in your home environment and your work environment, about making that space that you need to be your best self, whether it's in what you're doing, like productively, or whether it's in how you're filling up your own kind of well-being buckets, and your leveraging your strengths in ways where you're able to feel good about yourself and have a little bit more energy to get through. I think it's one thing to think about it for ourselves, but when we're doing it collectively, it makes it a lot easier for you to get what you need to, because now everybody's on board doing the same thing,
Totally. Yep.
Loving
that. Yep.
Does it work for the 9-month-old, Becky?
So fortunately, this particular 9-month-old likes to sleep a lot, so she gets a lot of third space. Let me just say that. So as long as we never move her from the dark closet that she is in, I think everything will be fine.
Let's end on that one. If we all just get a little more sleep, we'll probably be a lot better off.
That's probably part of that third space right there.
Yeah. All right, awesome. Well, thank you so much for taking the time again. Yeah. I'm so glad that we kind of dug it on the home front, because I think that it's critical, and hopefully we'll see a lot of what we are. I mean, I have to say, honestly, maybe I shouldn't say this, but it's a little bit nice that the crisis is lasting a little longer, because you can see we're going into a new part of the evolution, which is really making it work. And so for what we figure out how to make work, that stuff's going to be able to stick a lot longer, and really play a significant role in our future. So looking forward to digging in and making it work.
Yeah. And seeing what's in store. I think there's a worthy conversation to be repeated a year from now, even, to see like, what did we think were our tools, and what did we end up being able to do to cope, and where are we now? Could be a really cool conversation to continue on as life unravels in front of us. Not in a bad way.
All the good things. All right, awesome. Well, thank you. Have a great rest of your day, and appreciate your time.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks for having me on. Talk to you later, Kat.
All right, anytime. Bye.
Bye.
I'm so doing that pie chart. What a great visually way to talk about the different spaces that we are and our priorities in life, and really in a disarming and authentic way. Loving that as a takeaway for this episode. This concludes our brief series on the influence of your strengths on your sense of well-being in your life, your leadership, your work, your home. If you missed either of the previous 2 episodes, definitely check those out and get a full picture of what's possible in your well-being, even in crisis, when you use your strengths. If you and I aren't already connected in other places, I would love to connect with you on Instagram and LinkedIn, where we can continue this conversation around strengths in families, teams, well-being. On Instagram, you can find me at IsogoStrong, and on LinkedIn, you can find me by Becky Hammond. Finally, before we sign off with each other, let's talk a little bit about your strengths for a quick second. If you don't know your top 5 Clifton strengths from the Strengths Finder yet, or if you do know them, but maybe you haven't done too much with them yet, these strengths of yours can truly be your keys to well-being during this time. I'd love to help give you a jumpstart as your virtual coach. In an email coaching series for me called Strength Startup, you'll get insights into your talents and strengths, as well as some action that you can really take to make relationships easier around you, in stress and beyond. So if you go over to isogostrong.com/strengthstartup, you can check it out. There's 2 options there. One if you already know your top 5 strengths, and one if you have yet to discover them. So you can choose the track that's best for you. And because you've joined us in the Isogo TV community, please use this code for a discount. Virtual Coach 5 for $5 off. That's a virtual coach and the number 5 for $5 off. I'd be honored to get a chance to get to know you and your strengths and help you get a kickstart to greater well-being through your top 5 strengths. You know, you and your strengths, they really do have the power to make a ripple effect in your family, on your team, and then ultimately across the entire world. The world needs your strengths. So learn them, love them, and live them in your own circles of influence. Until next time on Isogo TV.